The rain had been falling on Denver for 3 straight days when I finally heard the words that would break me open. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I want to make that clear right from the start, because everything that happened after everything I'm about to tell you hinges on the fact that I wasn't looking for a reason to destroy my marriage. I was looking for the dog's leash, which had somehow ended up behind the laundry room door, and that's the only reason I was standing in that hallway at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, close enough to my wife's voice to hear it crack. "Mom, I can't keep doing this," Selene said. Her voice was low, tight, the kind of low you use when you don't want the walls to carry your words to the wrong room. "He doesn't know. He can't know. Not yet." I stopped moving. My hand was still on the doorframe. "The account's almost at 52,000, she said. "I've been so careful. If anything happens, I need this to already be in place. I need it to be ready." $52,000. I stood there in that hallway, sock feet on cold hardwood, and I felt something in my chest drop the way you feel an elevator drop when the cable's been cut. That half second of pure, sickening weightlessness before your stomach catches up to the rest of you. If anything happens, ready for what? Ready to leave, ready to disappear with our savings and start over somewhere I'd never find her. Sit with that for a second, because I did. I sat with it for 3 weeks before I understood what those words actually meant. And I'm going to tell you the whole thing, not the version I built in my head that night, standing in that hallway convincing myself my marriage was already over, but the real story, the one that took me almost losing everything to finally see clearly. My name is Harlan Whitaker. I'm 39 years old, and for 11 years I worked as a paramedic in the city of Denver, Colorado, before I made the decision to leave the ambulance behind and start my own company, an emergency preparedness and private security consulting firm called Ironclad Readiness. We train families, small businesses, even a few local municipalities on how to survive the things nobody wants to think about: fires, floods, home invasions, medical emergencies with no ambulance in sight. I built that company out of 11 years of watching what happens to people who weren't ready the split second, where preparation is the only thing standing between a bad day and a funeral. I tell you this because it matters. It matters to understand what kind of man I was before any of this happened, because the qualities that made me good at my job, the ones that kept strangers alive on their worst days, were the same qualities that were quietly poisoning my marriage. I don't talk about hard things. I never have. When I was 26 years old and pulled a father of 3 out of a car wreck on I-25, watched the light go out of his eyes in the back of my rig, while his wife screamed into a phone somewhere I couldn't see, I didn't tell anyone how that sat with me for months. I went home, I ate dinner, I went to bed, and I got up the next day and did it again. That's what you do. That's what I thought strength meant, carrying things silently, so the people you love never have to feel the weight of them. I brought that same philosophy into my marriage. Selene and I had been together for 9 years, married for 7. She is a curriculum designer for the Denver public school system, the kind of woman who could walk into a chaotic classroom and somehow make it feel like a place where children wanted to learn. She had this laugh that used to embarrass her, this big, unguarded laugh that came out of nowhere and made everyone around her laugh too, whether they knew what was funny or not. I fell in love with that laugh before I fell in love with anything else about her. But somewhere in the last 2 years, I'd stopped hearing it. I told myself it was just a season. Every marriage has seasons, right? I was building the company. She'd taken on a new position at the district office that had her working late 3 nights a week. We were both tired in that specific, bone-deep way that doesn't come from one bad night, but from 100 small ones stacked on top of each other. We'd stopped asking each other how our days were and started just reporting logistics. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Are we still doing dinner at your mom's Sunday? The dishwasher's making that sound again. I didn't see it as a crisis. I saw it as the natural erosion of a long marriage, the kind of thing you patch up eventually when things calm down. What I didn't understand, what I refused to let myself understand, was that Selene had been trying to talk to me for months, and every single time, I had shut the door on her without even realizing my hand was on the knob. I remember one night in March, maybe 8 months before any of this came to a head. Selene had made dinner, real dinner, not the frozen stuff we usually threw together, and she'd lit a candle, which should have told me something was on her mind. She waited until I'd had a few bites before she said quietly, "Harlan, can we talk about something?" And I felt it. I felt the old wall go up inside my chest, brick by brick, before she'd even finished the sentence. Because in my head, "Can we talk about something?" meant something is wrong and you are about to be told you have failed at it. That's not fair to her. That's not what she meant. But that's what 11 years of scraping people off highways and holding families together, while they fell apart in front of me, had trained into my nervous system. The belief that being needed meant being burdened, and being burdened meant I had to handle it alone, fast, and without letting anyone see me struggle. "Sure," I said, and I kept eating, and I didn't look up. She told me she'd been having trouble sleeping, that she'd been feeling anxious about money, about the future, about what would happen to her and to us if something happened to me, given my old job, given the fact that even now in the private sector, I still worked with fire departments and search and rescue teams on live incidents more often than she was comfortable with. She told me she'd been having a recurring dream where I didn't come home. And I did the thing I always did. I reached across the table, I squeezed her hand, and I said, "Hey, I'm fine. You don't need to worry about that. I've got it handled." I've got it handled. Looking back now, I think that sentence was the quiet, slow-motion collapse of my marriage, spoken in 5 words I thought were comforting. Because what Selene heard wasn't reassurance. What she heard was, "There is no room here for your fear. Put it away. I don't want to carry it, and I'm not going to help you carry it either." She never brought it up again. Not directly. And I, being the kind of man who mistook silence for peace, thought the conversation had simply resolved itself. Now let's talk about the account. About 6 weeks before that night in the hallway, Ironclad Readiness landed the biggest contract in the company's history. A 3-year consulting agreement with a regional hospital network to overhaul their emergency response protocols across 9 facilities. It was the kind of deal that changes a small business's entire trajectory. I'd worked towards something like this for 4 years, and when the contract finally came through, I remember sitting in my truck in the parking lot afterward and just breathing for a full minute, because I couldn't quite believe it was real. I wanted to celebrate with Selene. I wanted to see her face when I told her. But when I got home that night, she was on the back porch on the phone, and something in the set of her shoulders made me pause at the sliding door instead of walking straight out. I only caught the tail end. "I know, Mom, I know. I'm handling it." Then she saw me, and her whole posture changed, like a curtain dropping over a lit window, and she said a quick goodbye and came inside smiling like nothing had happened. I told her about the contract. She hugged me. She was happy for me, genuinely happy. I could tell that much, but there was something underneath it. A distance I couldn't name. I chalked it up to her being tired. I always chalk things up to her being tired because that explanation didn't require me to ask any harder questions. It was 2 weeks after that when I found the account. I want to be honest with you about how I found it because I'm not proud of it. We do our taxes together every year, and I was pulling old statements to send to our accountant, logged into the joint banking portal, when I noticed a linked account I didn't recognize. A savings account at a credit union across town, one we'd never used. I clicked into it out of nothing more than confusion at first. $51,400. Opened 14 months earlier. Regular deposits almost every 2 weeks, ranging from $300 to $900 at a time. My wife had been quietly moving money, our money from a joint income, money I had helped earn, into an account I had never heard of for over a year and had never said one word to me about it. I sat there at my desk for a long time. I want you to understand what was going through my head, because I think a lot of you watching this have had a version of this moment. The moment where the floor you've been standing on for years turns out to have a trapdoor in it you never knew was there. My first thought wasn't anger, it was fear. A cold, animal fear, the kind I used to feel walking into a scene where I didn't yet know what I was going to find. My second thought, right behind it, was worse. She's planning to leave. $51,000, hidden, growing steadily, patiently, for over a year. A secret phone call cut short the second she saw me. Late nights at work that had been creeping later and later. A woman who used to tell me everything, now telling her mother things in a hushed voice on the back porch instead of telling me at the kitchen table. I didn't confront her. That's the part I'm least proud of. Instead of asking her, instead of just saying, "Selene, I found something and I need you to explain it to me," I did what I always did. I went silent. I started building a case in my head, the way I used to build a mental timeline at an accident scene, piecing together evidence to understand what had happened before I arrived. Except this time the evidence was my own marriage, and I was investigating my own wife like she was a stranger. Over the following weeks, I started noticing everything. The way she'd angle her phone away from me on the couch. The way she'd go quiet when her mother called and then leave the room. The way she stopped asking me about my work trips, stopped asking when I'd be traveling for the hospital contract, when for years she used to worry out loud about every single overnight I had to take. I told myself she'd stopped caring. I told myself she'd already checked out, already halfway gone, and was simply waiting until she had enough saved up to make it official. By early June, I had made a decision. I called a divorce attorney, a woman named Rosalind Kemp, whose office was 2 floors above my old EMS station downtown, which felt like some kind of grim cosmic joke, and I scheduled a consultation. I told myself I was just exploring my options. But if I'm honest with you, and I'm trying to be honest with you in this whole story, I think some part of me had already decided. I think some part of me needed a reason to stop feeling like the world's biggest fool. And filing first felt like taking back a piece of control I was terrified I'd already lost. I drove to that first consultation on a Thursday evening in the rain, and I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, running through 11 years of marriage in my head like I was reviewing a case file. Every good memory came with an asterisk now. Our wedding day at that little chapel outside Boulder, her father crying before he even got her down the aisle. Was she already someone who kept secrets then? Or did I do this to her? The morning she surprised me with a graduation cake shaped like an ambulance when I finished my EMT certification. Did she love me then? Or was she already someone who could smile at me while planning her exit? I didn't sign anything that night. Rosalind Kemp was kind, professional, thorough. She walked me through the process, told me what to expect, told me Colorado was a no-fault, equitable distribution state, told me things about our shared assets that made my stomach turn because I hadn't even considered we'd have to divide up things like the house, the truck, the dog. She gave me paperwork to review. I put it in a folder in my truck and didn't look at it again for a week. That was the week of the Sunday dinner. Every other Sunday, Selene and I had dinner at her mother's house, a tradition going back to before we were even married, back when Vivian Caldwell used to make her famous pot roast every visit just to fatten me up, as she put it, because in her opinion I was too skinny to be trusted with her daughter. Vivian was 71 years old, sharp as a tack, a retired school administrator who'd raised Selene mostly on her own after Selene's father passed away when Selene was 19. She and I had always gotten along. She used to call me her insurance policy, half joking, because she said a man who ran toward emergencies instead of away from them was the kind of man you wanted in your family. I almost canceled that Sunday. I told Selene I had a headache. She looked at me for a long moment, and I remember thinking, even then, that there was something searching in that look, something that wanted me to say more than I was saying, and then she just nodded and said, "Okay. I'll tell Mom you're not feeling well." And something about how easily she accepted it, how quickly she let me off the hook, felt like more proof. See, I told myself, she doesn't even push anymore. She's already halfway out the door. But at the last minute, I changed my mind. Not because I wanted to go, but because some old instinct in me, the same instinct that used to make me double-check a scene even when dispatch said it was clear, told me I needed to be there. I told her I felt better. She smiled, small and a little surprised, and said, "Good, Mom will be happy." We got to Vivian's around 5. Dinner was good, pot roast, of course, and Vivian's cornbread, which she'd been making from the same recipe since before Selene was born. The conversation was easy in the way it always was, Vivian asking about the hospital contract, teasing me about finally becoming a real businessman. Selene laughing at one of her mother's old stories about Selene's disastrous first attempt at driving a stick shift in a church parking lot. For an hour, sitting at that table, I almost forgot. I almost let myself believe that maybe I'd built something out of nothing, that maybe the account had some boring explanation, that maybe I was about to blow up 11 years of my life over a misunderstanding. Then, after dinner, I went out to my truck to grab a bag of tools Vivian had asked me to bring. She wanted my help fixing a wobbly porch railing before the weather turned worse. And when I came back around the side of the house, the kitchen window was cracked open for the evening air, and I heard Selene's voice drifting out into the yard. She was talking to her mother, and she didn't know I was standing right there in the dark at the edge of the porch light with a toolbox in my hand. "I don't know how much longer I can keep it from him," Selene was saying, her voice thick like she'd been crying or was close to it. "He works with fire crews. He's out on hazmat sites, active rescue calls, sometimes twice a month now with this new hospital contract. Every single time his phone doesn't answer right away, Mom, I think about that call. I think about getting that call." "Sweetheart," Vivian said gently, "I can't ask him to stop doing what he loves," Selene went on. "I would never ask him that, but I needed to know that if the worst happened, I wouldn't be standing there with the kids' college fund and the mortgage and no idea how to keep our life together. I needed something that was just mine to manage, so I'd feel like I had some control over the thing that terrifies me most. I've been putting money into that account since last spring. It's almost $52,000 now. It's not because I don't trust him. It's because I love him so much that the idea of losing him without being ready to take care of everything he'd leave behind, it keeps me up at night, Mom. It genuinely keeps me up at night." I stood there in the dark with a toolbox hanging from my hand, and I felt my whole understanding of the last 6 weeks come apart at the seams. "Why haven't you told him?" Vivian asked. "Because he'll worry," Selene said, and I could hear the exhaustion in it, the accumulated exhaustion of carrying something heavy and hidden for a long, long time. "You know how he is. He carries everything by himself so nobody else has to, if I tell him. I've been having panic attacks about the idea of him not coming home. He'll blame himself. He'll think it means I don't trust his judgment, or that I want him to quit doing the work he spent his whole life training for. So I built the safety net quietly, and I told myself I'd explain it eventually, when I found the right way to say it that wouldn't make him feel like I was accusing him of something." There was a pause. I heard ice clink in a glass. "He's been so distant these last few weeks," Selene said, quieter now. "I don't know what's going on with him. I thought maybe it was the contract stress, but it feels different. It feels like he's already somewhere else." "Have you asked him?" Vivian said. "I've tried," Selene said. "Every time I try to open the door, he closes it so fast and so gently that I don't even realize it's happened until I'm standing outside again. I don't know how to reach him anymore, Mom. I love him. I love him so much it scares me. but I feel like I'm slowly losing him to whatever it is he won't let me see. I want to tell you that I walked right in at that moment and swept her into my arms, and everything was healed in an instant, because that's the version of this story that would feel good to tell. But that's not what happened, and I promised you the truth. What happened is I stood there in the dark for what felt like 10 minutes but was probably closer to 2, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't let myself feel in longer than I could remember. Shame. Not the hot, defensive shame of being caught doing something wrong, but the slow, sinking shame of realizing that the woman I loved had spent over a year quietly terrified of losing me, quietly trying to protect our family from a tragedy that hadn't happened. And I had spent that same year interpreting her fear as betrayal because I was too closed off to let her say it out loud to my face. $52,000 wasn't an exit fund. It was a widow's plan, built by a woman who loved me enough to prepare for the worst day of her life without ever once burdening me with how much that fear cost her. And I had a folder of divorce paperwork sitting in the console of my truck, 20 feet away. I didn't go inside right away. I walked to the edge of the yard, out past the porch light, into the dark where the rain had started up again, soft and steady. And I stood there and I let myself feel it, all of it, everything I'd been holding at arm's length for 11 years. I thought about my old partner Doyle, who used to tell me back on the ambulance, "Whitaker, you can't triage your own heart. You gotta let somebody else look at the wound." I'd laughed it off every time he said it. Big, tough, handle it myself, Harlan Whitaker, standing in his mother-in-law's backyard in the rain, finally understanding what his old partner had been trying to tell him for a decade. I thought about my own father, who died of a heart attack at 58 without ever once telling my mother he'd been having chest pains for 2 weeks beforehand, because he didn't want to worry her. I used to tell that story like it was a tragedy that happened to him. Standing in that yard, I understood for the first time that it wasn't just something that happened to him. It was a choice he made, over and over, the same choice I'd been making. The choice to protect the people you love from your fear by hiding it from them, never realizing that the hiding itself is its own kind of wound. I went back inside. I helped Vivian with the porch railing because I'd told her I would, and because my hands needed something to do while my head settled. Selene came out onto the porch partway through, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and handed me one without a word, and we worked in a silence that felt different than the silence we'd been living in for months. Not empty, just waiting. We drove home a little after 8. The rain had picked up, drumming steady on the roof of the truck, the wipers working hard against the windshield. Selene sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking out the passenger window, and about 10 minutes from home, without turning to look at me, she said, "You were quiet at dinner tonight." "I know," I said. "Is everything okay?" And here it was, the exact kind of question I would have deflected 100 times before. "I'm fine, just tired, long week." I could feel the old answers lining up in my throat, ready and easy and worn smooth from years of use. I pulled the truck over instead. Selene looked at me startled as I put it in park along a stretch of curb 3 blocks from our house. "Harlan, what's wrong?" "I found the account," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded rower than I meant it to. "The one at the credit union. I found it about 6 weeks ago, going through statements for taxes." I watched her face go through about 4 different emotions in the space of a second: surprise, then something like fear, then a kind of weary resignation, like a held breath finally being let go. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I was going to tell you, I heard you," I said. "Tonight, at your mom's, through the kitchen window. I wasn't trying to. I was getting the toolbox and I heard you." Her hand went to her mouth. "I thought you were leaving me," I said, and my voice cracked on the word leaving, cracked in a way I hadn't let it crack in front of another human being in longer than I could remember. "I found $51,000 in an account I didn't know existed, and phone calls you were hiding, and you pulling away from me for months, and I built this whole story in my head where you'd already checked out, where you were saving up to disappear. I met with a divorce attorney 3 weeks ago, Selene. I have paperwork in the back of this truck right now." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour. It was probably 4 seconds. "You were going to divorce me," she said, and her voice broke on it, tears coming fast now, streaking down in the amber streetlight. "Harlan, I have been terrified for over a year that something was going to happen to you on one of these hazmat calls or these fire ground rescues, and I didn't know how to tell you that without it sounding like I didn't believe in what you do, so I started saving. I started building something so that if the worst happened, I wouldn't be helpless. That's all it was. That's all it ever was." "I know that now," I said. "I heard you say it tonight. I heard everything." "Then why didn't you just ask me?" she said, and it wasn't an accusation so much as it was a genuine, aching question, the kind that had clearly been sitting in her for a long time, aimed not just at this moment but at years of moments like it. "Why do you always go quiet instead of asking me? I have tried so many times to reach you, Harlan. I tried in March at dinner, when I told you about the dream where you didn't come home, and you just squeezed my hand and told me you had it handled and changed the subject. I have been trying to tell you how scared I am for over a year, and every single time, you closed the door so gently I almost didn't notice you'd done it. I sat there in that parked truck, rain hammering the roof, and I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I just let her words land because they were true, and because I think some part of me had known they were true for a long time and simply hadn't had the courage to look at it directly. "You're right," I finally said. "I do that. I've always done that. I thought I was protecting you from my worries, from the ugly stuff I carry from the job, from anything that might make you feel like you had to take care of me. I thought that was what being strong for you meant. But all it actually did was leave you out there by yourself, scared, with no idea how to reach me, building a $50,000 safety net alone in the dark because you didn't feel like you were allowed to ask me for help carrying the fear." "I didn't feel like I was allowed," she said softly, "because you never gave me the chance." That sentence is the one that broke me, honestly, more than anything else that night. Because it was so simple and so true and so completely different from the story I'd been telling myself for 6 weeks. I hadn't been betrayed. I had been shut out my own wife, without ever realizing that the door swung both ways, that all that time I thought I was protecting her by carrying my fear alone. I was also teaching her that her fear had nowhere to go either. "I'm sorry," I said. "I am so sorry, Selene, not just for the last 6 weeks, for longer than that. For every time you tried to open a door and I closed it before you could even get a foot through. I thought silence was strength. I've been carrying it like armor my whole life, and I never once stopped to think about what it costs the person standing next to me." She was crying harder now, but there was something different in it, something loosening instead of breaking. "I need you to talk to me," she said. "Not just about logistics, about the real stuff, about what it's like on those calls, about what you're scared of. I don't need you to protect me from your fear, Harlan. I need you to let me in." That's what marriage is supposed to be. It's not one person standing guard over both of you. It's 2 people standing guard together. I reached across the console and took her hand, and for the first time in what felt like a year, she let out a breath like she'd finally set something down. "Cancel the meeting with the attorney," I said. "There isn't going to be a divorce. I don't want one. I never really wanted one. I think I just wanted to stop feeling like a fool, and filing felt like the only power I had left. But you're not someone I need power over. You're the person I should have been talking to the whole time." "I'm not canceling the account," she said, half laughing through tears. $52,000 is staying exactly where it is." "Good," I said. "Let's just both know about it from now on." We sat in that truck for almost 2 hours that night. 2 hours, 3 blocks from our own driveway in the rain, finally saying the things we should have been saying to each other for years. I told her about a call from 4 years back, a house fire with 2 kids trapped upstairs, one of them the same age our future kids might be, that I still saw sometimes when I closed my eyes, that I had never told a single living person about, not even my old partner Doyle. She told me about the night, 14 months earlier, when I'd been 6 hours late coming home from a wildfire support deployment with no cell signal, and she'd sat on our bathroom floor at 2 a.m. convinced she was about to get the worst phone call of her life. And that was the night she opened that account, right there on her phone, hands shaking, because she needed to feel like she was doing something with a fear that had nowhere else to go. We didn't fix 11 years of quiet walls in one conversation in a parked truck. I want to be honest about that too, because healing doesn't work like a movie montage, no matter how cinematic this story might sound to you right now. But that night was the crack in the wall. It was the first time in longer than either of us could remember that we let each other see the actual weight we'd both been carrying instead of the polished, "I've got it handled" version we'd been performing for each other for years. In the weeks that followed, we started something small but stubborn, a standing appointment, every Sunday night after we got back from her mother's, where we sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and just talked. Not about logistics, about the real things, the calls that stuck with me. The anxieties Selene carried about her job, about her mother getting older, about the parts of herself she felt she had to shrink down to keep our house running smoothly. It felt awkward at first, the way any new muscle feels awkward before it gets stronger. But we kept showing up for it. I went back to that attorney's office one more time, not for a consultation, but to formally close the file, and to thank Rosalind Kemp, oddly enough, because something about sitting in that waiting room with divorce paperwork on my lap had been the jolt I needed to finally stop and look at what I was about to throw away. Selene and I still have that account at the credit union. It's grown since then. We both contribute to it now openly, and we call it what it actually is instead of pretending it's something either of us needs to hide. We call it the just-in-case fund. And every couple of months, we sit down together and go over it, not out of fear anymore, but out of partnership. Because that's the thing I finally understood, standing in that rain 3 blocks from my own front door. Preparing for the worst day of your life isn't something you're supposed to do alone. That's not strength. That's just a quieter kind of loneliness, dressed up in the language of protecting the people you love. I think about that night in the hallway a lot. The night I first heard Selene's voice through the laundry room door, tight and scared, talking about a secret account and the words, "if anything happens." I built an entire ending to my marriage out of 4 overheard sentences. Because it was easier for me to imagine betrayal than it was to imagine that my wife had been quietly terrified for over a year and simply hadn't found a way to tell me, because I had never once given her a door soft enough to walk through. If you're watching this and you recognize some version of yourself in Harlan, the person who thinks carrying your fear silently is an act of love, who believes that "I've got it handled" is a kindness instead of a wall, I want you to hear this the way I wish somebody had told me years ago. Silence isn't strength. It's just a different kind of distance, and it grows whether you mean it to or not. The people who love us don't need us to be unshakable. They need to be let in. They need to know that when things get hard, they're not standing guard over the relationship by themselves. And if you're watching this and you recognize yourself in Selene, the person quietly building a safety net in the dark because you didn't feel like there was room for your fear anywhere else, I want you to hear this too. You are allowed to say the hard thing out loud. You are allowed to knock on that closed door as many times as it takes. The people who love us can't read our silence as clearly as we think they can. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do isn't to protect someone from your fear. It's to hand it to them gently and trust that they're strong enough to help you carry it. Selene and I are still married. We're better now than we were before any of this happened, not because the hard stuff disappeared, but because we finally stopped hiding it from each other. Every relationship carries weight. The question was never whether we'd have to carry something hard. The question was whether we'd carry it together, or alone, in separate rooms of the same house, mistaking silence for peace. So if there's one thing I hope you take from this story tonight, it's this. The account isn't the danger. The overheard phone call isn't the danger. The real danger is the distance that grows quietly, one unspoken fear at a time, between two people who still love each other but have forgotten how to say so out loud. Don't wait for a rainy Sunday and an open kitchen window to finally hear the truth. Ask the question today. Open the door today. Because the people we love aren't mind readers, and neither are we, and the only way any of us survive the hardest parts of life is together. The end. If you felt this one, hit that subscribe button. New stories like this drop every week. And I want to know, what would you have done in Harlan's shoes? Drop it in the comments below. I read them all.